Afternoon, everyone. Due to Queen's birthday, it is a short week. Today, obviously, I've been in the House, and tonight I have a phone call with the Irish Taoiseach to discuss our EU FTA negotiations and other matters. Tomorrow I'm in the House, and then on Thursday I travel to Sydney for meetings with the new Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, having already spoken with him a few times since his recent election. We'll have an informal dinner on Thursday night, and on Friday we will meet for our first formal bilateral meeting. Australia is our closest international relationship, and it is traditional to meet the incoming Prime Minister as soon as possible after their election. Given our close relationship, I'm pleased I'll be the first, as I understand, foreign head of government to meet with the Prime Minister in Australia since he took office a few weeks ago. On the agenda will be developments in our region, climate change, the US-backed Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and the upcoming Pacific Island Forum. This is also an opportunity for new conversations to be had on aspects of the bilateral relationship that have been difficult for a number of years, namely elements of Australia's deportation policy and the rights of New Zealanders in Australia. Here at home, this week, in the coming week, we are welcoming Samoan Prime Minister Fiami Naomi Mataafa, who will travel around the country for a number of community engagements and will officially mark 60 years of close diplomatic relations on the 14th of June. This is the Prime Minister's first official trip offshore since taking on her role, and we're delighted to host her. We are, first and foremost, a Pacific nation, and this will be another important opportunity for us to further discuss the key issues affecting our region. Finally, Cabinet has also taken the decision today to make monkeypox a notifiable infectious disease. This will require any suspected or confirmed cases of the disease to be reported and enables medical officers of health to exercise powers under the Health Act to help contain any spread of the infection. At this time, there have been no known or suspected cases of monkeypox in New Zealand, and the overall risk has been assessed as low to moderate. However, taking this action ensures a prompt public health response to contain any spread of infection, should it be required. I have Minister Dr. Aisha Verrill here and available for any questions that you may have that relate to monkeypox. Her background as an infectious diseases specialist was certainly helpful for Cabinet today as we discuss some of the details and what we're seeing internationally around monkeypox, and happy for her to share those insights with you should you so wish to hear them. Happy to take questions. Yeah, Jessica.
So how likely is it that you will get some kind of change with the 501s? Are you hopeful of that, and have you been given any indication that that will happen?
Look, I'm very clear with any Australian administration that this is a significant issue for New Zealand. Now, we accept that Australia has a deportation policy because New Zealand has a deportation policy. Our concern has been we have seen some of the really extreme examples, those who have little to no connection to New Zealand, who are being deported into New Zealand, and then we see the consequences of that antisocial behaviour and that lack of connection here at home.
To reset the relationship with Australia?
Oh, look, my view is that despite the friction that we had, and there were some obvious areas, yes, the deportation policy, which it was our job to be really clear about the frustration New Zealanders were feeling around it. Also the rights of New Zealanders in Australia. It's our job to be consistent on those, and we were. It didn't stop us working together on issues that mattered to us as well, be it from everything to exchanging ideas on COVID-19 to support that we provided them on bushfires and us on Whakaari White Island. Those relationships remain deep despite some of the tension we've had. Whether or not we'll make progress on them, look, we're clear with the incoming Prime Minister that these issues remain for us, regardless of who's in office. We want to make progress. That doesn't mean them having no deportation policy, because we have one. But we do want to see if we can make progress on some of those really difficult examples that New Zealand's come up against.
Are you expecting,
Jason.
Are you expecting, given that the new Australian Prime Minister is a Labour Party Prime Minister, that you'll be able to have, maybe he'll be able to give a little bit more insight, or will able to move on this 501 deportee issue more than Scott Morrison would have?
I don't want to set expectations around what may or may not happen before we have the conversation. But what I've already seen in the course of the election was an appreciation of how deeply New Zealanders feel about this issue. So there's an awareness there. How that translates into any change in policy, only time will tell. My job, though, is regardless of the political party that is in office, to advocate on behalf of New Zealand's interests. And as I say, that is regardless of the political party that has taken charge.
There, you gave quite an impassioned speech in front of the Sydney Opera House with Prime Minister Scott Morrison just a few metres away from you. If push comes to shove, if you don't get your way, will you be willing to go as hard as you were then with the new Prime Minister?
Absolutely. As I say, this is an issue for New Zealand that reaches beyond political parties, that reaches beyond how long, of course, either side has known one another. We've got to make sure that, particularly when it's those we consider family, that I understand the strength of feeling that we have on these issues. And I took that step because we'd repeatedly raised it and seen no progress. But, of course, I did it in such a manner where it was not unexpected for the Prime Minister. I had been very open that what I shared with him privately, I would share publicly if we didn't see movement. But look, this is the first engagement with the Prime Minister. It will be a positive one. I will raise these issues, but let's see where we can take them.
So would it be fair to say, would it be fair to say the greatest opportunity afforded to you by the change of Prime Minister is that Australia is effectively back at the table on climate change?
This is a significant step change in some of what we're seeing in terms of policy and rhetoric around the issue of climate change. Again, you know, we've been very careful about making sure that we're getting our own house in order. And particularly when we've been in the Pacific, where we've often been asked about Australia's position on climate change, our view is we had to make sure that we were doing our bit rather than casting around at the position of other nations. But I'm sure that what has already been projected, with climate change being a priority, will be welcomed by the region.
Does that make it easier when you engage with the Pacific, ahead of this, particularly with this Crunch Pacific Islands Forum meeting in mind?
Was not, obviously I can't speak on behalf of the Pacific. All I can do is reflect the conversations that we've had, and indeed the strong statements made by the Pacific Island Forum. The Pacific Island Forum and members themselves have said that the number one issue for the region is climate change. And despite obviously more recent discussion around some of the other issues in our region, it still actually comes back to the very real threat in the here and now that climate change represents. And New Zealand has been very clear on the role that we believe we should play: mitigation, adaptation, and supporting our region as we confront the challenge of climate change. I'll come to Amelia, then John, Joe, Thomas.
Thank you. For the people who are getting bullets through the windows of their homes, when will they see changes to gangs legislation?
Well, firstly, the issue we have right now is that there is escalation, no question. We've got to make sure that the police are well supported to respond to that escalation. Already you've seen they've been sharing some of the information of the number of arrests that have been made, warrants that have been issued and undertaken, also the number of firearms that are being seized and ammunition. Only in the recent weeks, as many as 250 rounds of ammunition and a number of firearms. That is the response the police are taking. Our job is to make sure they have enough police officers, they have more organised crime people on the job, and that they have the legislation around firearms that they need.
When will you make those changes?
They already are in place. Obviously, those that relate to, for instance, certain guns being prohibited are already in place. The extra funding we've put in to recruit more police officers, already in place. We have 700, of course, working across organised crime as a result of that extra recruitment in addition. So that's already there. What we've said to the police is if there is any legislative change that would help you in your current fight against gangs, tell us. Because we do need to respond to the escalation in tensions that we've seen, particularly between two gangs in Auckland in recent times.
Passionate speech in the House about that. Is it your view that the opposition is playing politics over this issue?
Well, it's my view that we do have a clear escalation at the moment in parts of the country. We absolutely do. That is not under dispute. It's also not under dispute that, of course, that escalation is causing, understandably, huge anxiety for the communities where it's occurring. My pushback to the opposition was, let's talk about the things that will make a difference. We've already put forward, of course, changes to those firearms that are able to be in circulation in New Zealand. We've got the gun register, we've got the firearm prevention orders, we've also got the firearms unit, and we're working on extra measures around the seizure of assets for organised crime. If the opposition have other options that they wish to discuss with us, we're open to that. But simply the charge that because we are in office, there is a problem with gangs, I reject. Yeah. Sorry, I had John, Joe, Thomas, then I'll come back to you, Amelia.
When you meet Australia's Prime Minister, obviously the rights of New Zealanders in Australia have been stripped back somewhat in recent years and decades. How likely is it that you will discuss issues such as access to benefits, voting rights, and related topics?
Well, actually, if you come back to the core of that issue, it all comes back to the ability to access citizenship. And so will we be raising that? Yes, we have consistently. Deportation, citizenship issues have been on the table throughout my time in office and will continue to be an issue that we raise. Because as you point out, it does mean New Zealanders who contribute a significant amount to Australia, you know, they're taxpayers, they are filling skills gaps, they often have long-standing connections, find themselves sometimes, for instance, in a disadvantaged position when it comes to education for their kids. It means they pay the equivalent of ACC but can't draw down on it if they need. And we have seen some really distressing situations. So yes, it will be an issue I continue to advocate on.
Do you feel any conflict in the sense that if New Zealanders have greater rights in Australia, that may exacerbate the likelihood of brain drain to Australia?
No, because I think actually the issue is that most New Zealanders don't think about necessarily what might happen if a problem arises. I don't think they necessarily think about if they have an accident at work, or necessarily what rights their kids might have further on down the track. And that's understandable. There's probably an assumption that there's a reciprocal approach to the way Australians and New Zealanders are treated in both countries, and that has actually changed over time. So I don't think that's necessarily in the calculation, and that's why it has been quite distressing to see some of the examples we've seen. Joe?
You talked about the upcoming Pacific Islands Forum, but I mean, has a date been set for that? Are you 100% confident it's going ahead?
Well, it's obviously not for me to announce confirmation, so I'll leave it to the Pacific Island Forum, but I know that there is a very firm focus on making sure that everyone is available and able to attend, given how important the meeting will be.
Date has moved a lot, and my understanding is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not yet sure of a certain date. They have a month perhaps. So, I mean, is there still a lot of uncertainty around that happening?
I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know I would describe it in that way. But again, it's not for us. We are planning around dates, but it's not for me to confirm them. Again, I'll just highlight the fact that a big focus has been on making sure everyone's available to attend. As you can imagine, unlike set pieces where you always know that UNGA's held at certain times of the year, or APEC and ASEAN, obviously because this one has moved because of border closures, it's been a logistical challenge for the Secretariat, I imagine, but they're doing a great job at trying to get everyone there.
So given what is going on in the Pacific, the geopolitical situation there, and sort of, I guess, how unsettling it is at the moment in the Pacific, are you concerned that if a date can't be found, if the can keeps getting kicked down the road, what that means in terms of not getting leaders together?
No, what I've heard is the Pacific Island Forum members all very keen to meet, to use it as an opportunity to discuss a PIF approach to some of these challenges. And so obviously integral to that is the ability for us to then have those conversations. So no, I'm confident that regardless of form, that the opportunity will arise very soon. Amelia.
Thank you. Some in the public have been pondering that we've just had Queen's birthday weekend that should, sadly, the time come, whether we would move that to King's birthday long weekend in November, as Charles has a birthday on the 14th.
So I would want to go and check this, but I believe it is already tagged within our legislation around dates and then the naming rights of it, as it were. But as you can imagine, this isn't something that I've gone to the point of going and checking the legislation on, because of course we all hope that the Queen has a long and healthy life, given how much she has done for everyone. So it's not something I've gone and looked at the detail of, but my belief is that that is already set out in our legislation.
New Zealand look to follow Australia's lead in appointed minister of becoming a republic?
No, Australia and New Zealand have long been in quite a different position or quite different progress on the debate around this issue. There's been a strong Republican movement in Australia for a number of years. They've often discussed referendum on this issue, and the public motivation around it seems quite different to me than what it is here in New Zealand. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Australia have moved in this way. But I've always said that whilst I believe it is a change that New Zealand would make, it's not something I anticipate happening while we're in government.
I guess, but if Australia were to go through that process, it would be likely then that New Zealand would sort of look to do the same, wouldn't it?
Again, I think it is something that New Zealanders will naturally begin to debate, and I believe in my lifetime, but I don't believe it will be while we're in government. We've never heard this as a priority for New Zealanders. There's so many other issues we need to be dealing with that the issue of a republic, I can hand on heart say, is not something that I have raised with me other than in these forums.
Switching it up
does the government have some obligation to
Oh, yeah, sorry, did I skip you, Thomas? I might have. I'll come back to Thomas and back to you, Amelia.
Does the government have some obligation to sort of ensure that New Zealand is ready to make that step when New Zealand is ready to make that step? I imagine it's a very constitutionally complicated step, and you wouldn't want to just sort of leap into the unknown, right?
Absolutely. There are complexities to that debate in New Zealand, which are different to in Australia as well. And again, there is the complexity. But there is also whether or not it's a priority for New Zealanders. And, you know, I've been around in politics for a long time. It's not something that I've had proactively raised with me much at all. It's just not on Kiwis' minds.
President Macron has said that suggested that Russia needs an off-ramp to the conflict in a way that doesn't sort of humiliate or embarrass Russia, that has inflamed tensions in Ukraine. Ukraine is sounds like quite heavy for Russia to be embarrassed. Where does New Zealand stand on this? Would we seek a solution to the conflict that does or does not embarrass Russia?
Look, I'm not going to get into a commentary around statements made by other leaders. But what I think you'll find is that everyone has been seeking a diplomatic solution. Everyone. Because everyone wants the war to end. The issue has been that diplomatic solution has not been found. It does not appear to be readily or even close to being reached. Does that diminish the need to find it or the fact that we need to ensure that there's a continued focus on that? No. But again, we're not seeing much progress in that regard.
A view on whether Ukraine should consider offering up territory to Russia in the Donbass?
Our view has been that this war represents an invasion of and a disregard for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We have encouraged and supported a diplomatic solution. A diplomatic solution would, of course, require both parties to be satisfied by the agreement that's being reached, but we're very clear that what's happened here is illegal and it is wrong.
The solution to the conflict would be one that respects the borders of Ukraine as they were before the conflict began.
Again, that is not for New Zealand to determine. We are not the ones engaged in the war. We're not the one that has been invaded. Do we support a diplomatic resolution or supporting parties coming together to find a resolution? Absolutely, but we're obviously not ones to determine what needs to be brokered.
Returning to the Trans-Tasman stuff, I know that we've talked about climate change and Jason sort of mentioned it before. You are both Labor Prime Ministers.
Yeah.
Does it present opportunity, or is it something you're cautious of, or is it irrelevant? How do you reflect on that?
Well, its relevance includes the fact that you're a little more likely perhaps to have known one another or engaged or known other members of an incoming cabinet. So there is that. And look, that certainly helps encourage those early relationships, no doubt. And so, yes, that makes a difference. I guess the point that I'm making is who is in government won't change the nature of the issues that we raise. It won't change the focus that we have. It will likely mean that some of the priorities that we have may align. And you see, for instance, climate change is likely to be one of them. That then presents opportunities perhaps to cooperate together. So yeah, you will see that emerge, I believe.
You have a nice budding friendship going with Albo. He obviously called you from the car on the way to his election night speech. I just wondered, is he cooking or is he taking you somewhere?
I haven't asked. Taking me somewhere just sounded a little odd. I haven't asked, but it is informal. And that, I think, just speaks to the fact that we've met before, we've had many conversations before. It is a chance to get into a little bit more of a deeper discussion without the formality of a bilateral. This is one of the things that you will have observed. You will have come into and photographed or filmed the beginning of bilaterals. They are essentially observed conversations, two people trying to start dialogue, often getting to know one another, with sometimes 20 people watching you. It's not necessarily the easiest environment to just, get to know one another. Yes, I've met Albo on several occasions and some of his other members, and so that's really helpful to the relationship, but it's always helpful to also spend a little bit more time. Can I check, does anyone have any monkeypox questions? Because I'm aware that I have the Minister and I'm taking her precious time through her availability here. Does anyone want to ask anything? Mark, Jessica? Shall I bring you up, Minister, and we'll just get... Okay, so Mark, you've got a quick question? It's not obligatory. I'll bring the Minister up. Far away.
In January 2020, we didn't, we rated COVID as a sort of low, maybe not even low to moderate, just low threat.
Yeah, good question.
For monkeypox, what are the
What's
chances
the difference?
that you could see an actual pandemic?
Yeah.
I think the two diseases are very different in their nature. COVID being spread by quite casual interactions because it's spread via either droplets or aerosols. Monkeypox requires probably face-to-face interactions or closer contact than that. And previously, we've seen monkeypox lead to quite short chains of transmission. So the outbreaks have been limited, whereas COVID clearly was a totally novel pathogen. We have some experience with monkeypox.
Minister, monkeypox in the West appears to not be particularly fatal. Most people appear to survive, but in African countries it kills, in some cases, as many as 1 in 10 people infected. Are you aware of any assistance that the global community, including New Zealand, is providing to those countries to help them weather what's actually sometimes quite a serious illness with them?
Look, not specifically around at this stage, but I think I'd say it falls into that category of what you'd call globally emerging infectious diseases, and I think New Zealand has made contributions in international fora, particularly around the concept of a One Health approach to preventing infectious diseases, which is the idea that animal health and environmental health is very connected to human health. So what you see with monkeypox, which is not in fact necessarily from monkeys, but can be from a range of other small mammals and rodents and things, is that agricultural and other practices can lead to human communities getting monkeypox because of things like deforestation. So often solutions that come to light when you look at things in that way are looking at more about the economics of those communities and why environmental change is happening. So I think we have a role to play because we're very good practitioners of One Health in this country.
So in a sense, then monkeypox actually has similarities with COVID because COVID is linked to human incursion on previously wild areas and increased interaction with wild animals.
At a very high level, that is one of the reasons why new diseases emerge over time. Yeah.
My understanding is that smallpox vaccination can help prevent monkeypox. Obviously, there aren't many people in New Zealand who are vaccinated against smallpox. Do we have any smallpox vaccines, or is it
we have a smallpox vaccine, which isn't the ideal vaccine to use to prevent monkeypox should we need it. There are what's called a third generation vaccine, which would be an improvement, and there is very limited supplies of that vaccine available globally. Were we to have cases here, our response would primarily be driven by testing and contact tracing. And ESR has developed, should have a PCR test online this week in order to facilitate that.
Would the testing and contact tracing regime be something New Zealanders are familiar with? The experience would be somewhat similar to what we've had the last couple of years?
broadly, but because of the dynamics of this virus, there will be some differences. We'll be inquiring about different types of contact, for example. So far, the virus appears to be spread through sexual networks, but it can also be spread through close contact and through fomites, so blankets, for example, that sick people have used. Then the other thing is the incubation period can be up to 21 days. So during that interview, you're asking someone to recall 21 days of exposures, and the isolation period is longer too.
What would that require of someone to...
You're likely to see the symptoms rather than isolating every single person.
That's right. So what we'll be doing in the first instance is asking people who have been identified as contacts to monitor for symptoms, because unlike COVID, with monkeypox, we believe that infectivity starts after symptoms.
Told you it was interesting. Anyone else on monkeypox?
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Minister. Great. Okay, happy to finish up with the last couple, so we'll go Amelia, Jessica, and we'll finish with you, John.
Thank you. Court has ordered the Iranian embassy here to pay a tradie more than $250,000 for unpaid work, but they won't. Have you had any communication, or have your officials had any communication with the embassy about this?
I'm not personally aware, but as you'd know, I'd want to go back and check before giving you a definitive answer on that, but not that I've personally been briefed on.
Are there any actions that you could take if they hide behind diplomatic immunity?
We have had experiences before without knowing the detail of the case. I couldn't speak to the specifics of what tools might be available, but I'm happy to go away and look at the question.
Could you just
Jessica,
outline
and then John.
what contact you've had with Anthony Albanese pre him becoming Prime Minister? Like, have you called him or messaged him or met up with him? Or
Yeah, so I've met him on a couple of occasions. I recall specifically sitting down with him and Penny Wong in my electorate. I'd need to go back and check the dates, and obviously the couple of phone calls. So, and he's been in New Zealand attending Labour Party events from time to time as well. He's a long-standing member of the Labour movement, and so that has given us occasion for our paths to cross.
describe your relationship at the moment. Are you friends? How would you describe it?
You know, for me, what's really important on behalf of New Zealand is the ability that no matter what, I can pick up the phone. I can already say that I have that relationship with the new Prime Minister, and for me, that will serve, I hope, New Zealand well, because when disaster strikes on either side of the Tasman, we're often the first ones to be in touch with one another.
Prime Minister, how concerned is the government about reports that China is secretly constructing a naval facility in Cambodia? Multiple reports of this. How concerned is the government about that, not only due to Cambodia's geographical location, but the apparent secrecy shrouding this project?
Yeah. So I'll just make a general statement. I mean, for New Zealand, we often judge activity in the Asia-Pacific region based on the question of whether or not it provides peace and stability. We've been very opposed to the increasing militarisation of our region, the Pacific region, because we do not believe that it adds to the peace and stability in our backyard. And that's the way we often approach these questions. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.